All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Looks like we got a majority of the people. So today we will be talking about enterprise roll-up properties. So this is really geared around news and media companies, but this is certainly something that a lot of other companies in different industries can utilize. So e-commerce websites or e-commerce companies, CPG companies, big multinational brands, really all of those are going to be relevant to this discussion. So just to introduce the company here, my name is Andy Gibson. I am the head of vertical for news and media here at InfoTrust LLC. So we are based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, but we do have an office in Dubai as well. So InfoTrust, essentially, we're a web analytics consulting and product development company. We analyze and support over 4,500 sites a year. And then we run 50 plus digital marketing and analytics training programs a year as well. And so really the main relationship we have with our clients is we are Google Analytics certified partners, and we're also Google Analytics 360 authorized resellers. So those are big areas of our engagements with companies, is really helping them get the most out of Google Analytics and Google Analytics 360. And then any additional tools related to that. So tag management systems like Google Tag Manager, data visualization software like Tableau or Google Data Studio, which we'll actually talk about here in a minute. So for today, here is the agenda. This is going to be a rather short webinar today. It's not going to go probably longer than 30 minutes. Really, the purpose for this webinar was to introduce you to roll-up properties within Google Analytics 360, how those work, why you should be using them. I'll show you guys some use cases and some examples from other clients that we actually work with. I'll talk a little bit about connecting to Data Studio, which is another Google product for data visualization. But that really is relevant to any other type of data visualization product you're using, whether it's Domo, Tableau, Spotfire, something like that. And then at the end, we'll go through how to get started. And so if you have any questions throughout, please feel free, ask them in the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a question section there. I will get to them at the end. But if you have additional questions that you might not be comfortable submitting here, my email is on the last slide of this. And just to repeat it, it's agibson@infotrustllc.com. And so if you have any additional questions or you'd like to schedule a call to kind of go through this a little bit more in depth, feel free to reach out to me. Our marketing team will actually be following up in a day or so with the recording, a link to the recording, and then also these slides. So if you are wanting to email me and you didn't get the email address, just wait a couple days and we'll send you the slides, which have them in there for you. So let's go ahead and get started here. One of the main things to know with roll-up properties for Google Analytics is that they are only a feature for Google Analytics 360 users. So you have to purchase the premium product, Google Analytics 360, to be eligible to create a roll-up property. And so if you don't know any of the benefits with Google Analytics 360, we're just going to cover those very quickly just so you guys have an idea what you'd be getting yourself into. Essentially with GA360, you have higher data collection limits. So typically, if you have more than 10 million hits a month, really Google Analytics 360 is a good bet for you. Faster processing. So this is one of the big things. Currently with Google Analytics, the free version, there is no SLA, so you don't have any type of data collection guarantee. With the free version, it's generally between 24 and 48 hours before you see that data refresh in your properties, but it can be shorter than that. It depends on how many hits you're actually sending for your website monthly or your app monthly. For Google Analytics 360, the fast processing means you have an SLA agreement with Google that it's going to be under 4 hours for 99.9% of the time. And currently, they're actually averaging somewhere closer to 15 minutes data refresh in the actual reports. More integrations. So this is a big one. Companies that are using a lot of other Google products, you'll be able to essentially integrate Google Analytics 360 with those products to send data to those products or bring data from those products back into Google Analytics 360. So double-click for publishers, DFP has an integration, double-click Bid Manager, double-click Campaign Manager, and then, of course, Google BigQuery as well. With the Google BigQuery, you can actually set up external reports or external exports, essentially, that are going to daily collect the data from Google Analytics and put that into a BigQuery table for you. So then you can do all of your different types of querying from BigQuery if you want. It's raw, unprocessed, hit level data. There's no sampling. So there are some benefits if you're a larger company and you already have some type of data visualization software that you can actually connect BigQuery to something like a Tableau and then visualize everything that you need to. And then also enterprise administration features. So this is a rather new concept with the Google Analytics 360 suite. Announcement earlier, I think it was last year. Essentially, you're allowed to, or you're able to, manage your entire organization's users across all those different suite products. So Google Analytics 360, Tag Manager 360, Optimize 360, Data Studio 360. You can actually manage everybody's user access at an organizational level instead of actually having to go into each specific product and manage it that way, which is nice. And then, of course, what we're here to talk about today, the Rollup properties. So this is a GA360 only feature, which will allow you to essentially create Rollup properties without any type of retagging on your site or app or updating any types of code. So this is a huge benefit. Prior to this Rollup reporting functionality being released with Google, the way you had to do the type of Rollup reporting was to basically create additional property trackers, additional Google Analytics trackers, and put it onto your website or app. So for instance, if I am InfoTrust, let's say we own 5 different websites, if I wanted to see all that traffic inside of one GA property, I would then essentially need to put in on every single one of those websites one Google Analytics tracker for the local property, so just reporting on that website, and then a global tracking code or a global tracker onto that site as well. And so all 5 of those sites would then have one of the same tracking codes, which would be that global tracker. And then that would roll everything up into Google Analytics. There's a lot of downsides to doing it that way. The data is really muddy. It doesn't do a lot of deduplication, which we'll talk about here in a bit. And also it does require development work because then you have to create a new Google Analytics property. You have to then deploy that Google Analytics code through whatever tag management system you're using or in the source for all of these different sites. So a little bit intensive, not really the best way to go about it. And so that's where Rollup properties in Google Analytics 360 come about. So let's talk about some benefits here for the Rollup property. One is that you can include multiple data sources in the same Rollup property. So for instance, if you have, let's say, a website, you have an app, and then you have something like a Roku or a Apple TV app, all that data can actually be included in the same Rollup property. So you can start looking at users across those different platforms in the same exact Rollup property, which is nice. It's not a one-to-one match with website-to-website Rollup property or app-to-app Rollup property. You can actually combine it all in the same Rollup. Session merging. So this is interesting. So when users are visiting multiple properties in the same Rollup, so for instance, if I have 5 different websites that we're rolling up into that one Rollup property, those sessions are actually deduped. So if they visit, let's say, 2 different properties, it'll be a session essentially on each one of those properties, but in the Rollup, it'll only be one session because it's essentially treating that Rollup property as one site. So it's deduping those sessions across the different properties that are being rolled up. And then each hit counts less. So I described kind of the process prior to Rollup properties being a thing, a feature in Google Analytics 360. You would have to create additional trackers, and so you'd have your global tracker, which you put on every single site that you were running to roll up into that Rollup property. Because you're doing it that way, you are doubling, tripling, quadrupling your hit limit, right? So if I have 4 websites and I'm putting a global tracker on all 4 of those sites, we're essentially counting that traffic twice because we have our local property GA tag, and then we have our global property GA tag for each one of those sites. With Rollup properties, each Rollup hit only counts as 0.5 of a hit. It's half, so it's not that full 1. So it's not a one-on-one hit, essentially monthly hit basis. And so for those of you that don't know, Google Analytics 360 is hit based, so it's monthly hit limits. And so the first tier is essentially 500 million hits a month. And so obviously, if you're not wanting to pay a whole bunch more money to create a Rollup property tracker, then this is going to cut that cost in half a little bit. So that's nice. It doesn't count as a full hit. And then you can also enable remarketing audiences based on those Rollup properties. And so this will allow you to do things like remarket based on visitor actions on any of your source properties in the Rollup, and not just one specific source or property. So a few things that you need to know. So how it works, the properties that you're actually wanting to roll up, they must all be within the same Google Analytics account. And so this is one caveat. If you have 5 different accounts and you want to roll up a property in all 5 accounts, you actually have to move those properties first into the same account. One of the nice things, though, is in the last probably 6 or 7 months, Google actually came out with a way to move properties across accounts. And so this is something that you can do standard. You don't have to have a GA360 account to do it. So if you do need to do this, you can then move them all into the same account. So you have all the properties in the same account, and then you can create a roll-up property. All the properties that are going to be rolled up must already have Google Analytics 360, so they must have that enabled already. If you are a GA360 customer, you either work directly with Google or you work with a company like InfoTrust as a GA360 reseller. They can actually do that for you, or you can do it yourself if you have the correct administrative rights. And then after you have all the properties in the same account and you have all of your properties upgraded to GA360, then you have to actually reach out to Google to then create that roll-up property for you. It's kind of funky right now. I'm not quite sure why it's still required that you reach out to Google, but this is where your GA360 reseller can actually help out. So they'll actually reach out to Google for you, and then Google will create that roll-up property. So you can go ahead and start selecting then all the different properties to roll up in the GA admin interface. And so I have an example screenshot, I think here, and a couple more slides that shows you kind of what that process looks like in Google Analytics. And then from there, you really need to decide on if you need to map different things like custom dimensions and metrics into the roll-up property. So if you have 5 websites you're rolling up and they all have the same custom dimensions 1 through 10, you can then map those into the roll-up property so you can see all those custom dimensions and metrics, all those values in the same slot in the roll-up property. And then obviously after that, it's just using the reports. So you can build out necessary reports or dashboards, or if you're using some additional type of data visualization tool, then you can essentially export that information into your Tableau, your Domo, Google Data Studio, something like that. The next section here is why you should be using it. And so there are a couple clear benefits to using roll-up properties. One is it's much easier to compare properties against each other. As I had mentioned, instead of having to do all this extra development work, you can actually have Google do a lot of that processing on their own. So you don't have to worry about trying to dedupe data or making it cleaner. Essentially, everything that's going into your Google Analytics property is going to go into already your roll-up property. And so everything is very one-to-one basis in the actual roll-up. Everything's very easy to compare. And so you're making comparisons across different markets. So if you have, a global company might compare across different regions or different countries. Local company might be across cities, across platforms. So we'd mentioned that you can roll up web and app data into the same property, but you might want to compare web versus app in terms of things like users or sessions. And so that's a way to do that. Across brands, so if you're a multinational company or you're a global CPG, something like that, you can then compare specific brands against each other, and across countries as well. So that kind of ties into markets. And then the other thing that I mentioned just a second ago is that Google's doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It's doing all that processing on the back end. So there's no code updates required. So again, you don't have to go out and create new trackers and put those on all your websites. Nothing is required in terms of development work. You don't have to export your data and do any type of deduplication work in some other tool. All that is done for you on Google servers, and so everything is clean coming in that roll-up property. Then you can also easily connect it to additional tools like BigQuery, Tableau, Data Studio 360, Domo, etc. For advanced visualizations. And this is one of the nicer things. As we work with a lot of larger companies, they already are using something like a Tableau, Data Studio, Domo. And so for them, most of their reporting is actually being done there. And so if they wanted to do a lot of comparisons prior, they would have to do a lot of that work on their through their tool. And so, for instance, if they have 5 websites that they're wanting to roll up, they'd have to use essentially the Google Analytics API, connect those 5 properties, pull that data out, summarize that data, put it into a visualization, compare and contrast it that way. Whereas in this case, if you're using a rollup property, all that's already done for you. And so all you have to do is connect to one Google Analytics property, which is that rollup property, and then it makes available all the other data coming from those additional properties. And so it's one connection versus 5. It's already doing all the summarizing and deduplication. So from your end, it's as easy as connecting to or logging into Tableau, connecting to your data source, which is going to be your rollup property, and then all that information is available to you. You don't have to worry about deduping or anything like that. So some use cases and examples, couple visualizations here just to show you kind of different example use cases that we've run into with clients. So one is comparing brands. And so you'd have something like a brand A rollup, brand B rollup, and a brand C rollup. And obviously with each one of these brands, they probably have different websites. So if you're thinking about, let's think of a big CPG company like Procter & Gamble, they have Tide, where they might have Tide Japan, Tide China, Tide USA. So all those would be different websites under that brand, and they can compare Tide versus some of their other brands that way. So this is an example just comparing brands, which is nice. A platform comparison. So we talked about this a little bit, but this would be basically comparing things like your websites to your mobile websites to your mobile apps. Even if you have something like OTT apps, so Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Stick, or something like that, those can all be compared. And so for this, you might have all of your different websites rolled up into just a web rollup, all of your mobile web rollups, or all of your mobile websites into one rollup, and the same thing with apps. And so for this, then you can compare things like users or sessions across your websites versus your mobile websites versus your mobile apps. And so we have a couple publishers that actually have this sort of setup with rollup properties, where it's nice for them to be able to then compare and contrast kind of if their audience is growing for web versus mobile app, and kind of make those comparisons, which is very valuable for them. Another is market comparison. And so this is another example where we see, we work with some publishers that have a lot of local markets across the United States. So they might have Tulsa versus Tampa versus Baltimore. And so in this way, they'll have roll-ups for each of those markets, and they can compare then by market all the different types of properties in that specific market. So some will have multiple websites in a market, multiple mobile apps, it's possible mobile websites, and so you can actually then compare, roll all of that into one specific market rollup, so you can then see users across that market compared to users and sessions across the other markets, and see which ones are going fastest, which ones are shrinking, and that sort of thing. So this is another great use case that we've seen with a lot of publishing clients, but this does make sense also for some other types of companies as well. And then the last use case here that I'll be sharing with you is the global corporate rollup. And so for this example, you might just be a publishing company that operates 20, 30, 40 different websites and apps. In this instance, you might just want to see everything rolled up into one, and then you be able to compare and contrast all of those against each other. So for example, if you are a media conglomerate that owns 50 different websites, you can then roll those all up into one specific rollup, and then you can see all of those compared to each other in your rollup reporting. And I'll show you an example of what that rollup reporting looks like here in a second, so it's a little bit easier to visualize what this reporting looks like, but it will allow you to essentially compare website 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. To each other, and then it'll show you the metrics like users, sessions, page views, and all that together. So then you can definitely compare and contrast what you're looking at across that. So here's an example of what that rollup property setup looks like. So once you have Google create a rollup property for you, you then go in and need to add your source properties. And so for this, you can see here that we're rolling up source properties for example 1, example 2. These are all made up, of course. Couldn't show you real client data, but this would be an example of what it would look like for us to roll up 10 or 15 or 20 different websites in one rollup. So Rollup's created. Within that Rollup, there's the Rollup management section. It's as simple as clicking on that Add Source Properties button and then selecting one of the properties in that account that you want to roll up. And so in this case, there's actually 45 that we're rolling up. I'm just showing you the first 10. And again, this is how that rollup is working. So essentially what it's going to do is Google is just going to look for all the data that's being sent to the first property versus the second property versus third. It's sending all that up into that rollup property. And so it's literally just saying, put the data in that local property. So put the data in UA-12345-1, but then also put that data into the rollup property as well. And it'll do that for every single one of those source display properties. And then here's an example of a report. So in this case, we're looking at the first 10 of that 45 rollup or 45 website rollup. In this example, we're looking at just example 1, example 2, etc. And so now you can see at a high level the different metrics associated with each one of those websites. And so if you're using an app, it'll be very similar, but the source property display name is not going to be a .com URL. Obviously, it'll probably just be the name of the app or the market in the name, something like that. And so in this example, you can see we're sorting by users. And so example 1 and example 2 have the most users. You can see sessions. This is a typical Google Analytics report. So it takes that ABC method of acquisition, behavior, and conversion metrics. And so you can just compare and contrast all of these metrics across all of your different rollup properties that you have set up here. And again, if you're using the rollup property tracker kind of that we've described previously, which is kind of the old method where you actually have to add an additional tracker to all of your different websites to roll up, the data is much, much more muddier than this. And so there's no dimension called source property display name in this case if you're doing the previous method. And so all of those different URLs are going to be logged in here. And so it gets very confusing in the report, and so you have to do some custom dimension and filter work to make everything look this nice. Whereas in this case, really you didn't have to do anything. You just had to get a rollup property created by Google and then select the rollup properties that you wanted to include in here. One of the other things I wanted to show you was connecting to Data Studio for richer visualizations. And so this is one of the really cool things that we've been working with some news and media companies on recently. Not just Data Studio, they use Tableau and Domo as well. But because Data Studio is free for all of 2017, thought I would show you guys some examples here. So for this instance, we're using Data Studio 360, and this data is actually connected to just one specific rollup property. Or actually, we're looking at 3 different rollup properties. So we have a main site rollup property, which is just the desktop sites. We have a mobile website rollup property, and then a mobile apps rollup property. And so on the right hand, you can see here, we're actually using multiple data sources. So 3 different rollup properties for 3 different platforms. And you can see we're comparing sessions, page views, and users together, which is nice. So with Data Studio, you can have a lot better visualization. So you can control really the types of visualizations. You can control the actual formatting and color schemes and layout and all that stuff. So it's really easy to make this look nice. Whereas if you're using Google Analytics, as you may know, there's no way for you to brand it, change the different types of visualizations for the most part, add in call outs or anything like that. And so you have access to better visualizations with Data Studio 360. The one thing I mentioned, multiple data sources. So in this case, multiple rollup properties. You can actually use those in the same dashboard. You can add your company and agency branding. You can also share these dashboards to people very similarly to how Google Drive operates. You just get a Google Drive link, you go to it, and it opens it up. Works the same way with Data Studio. It's really built on that Google Drive sharing capability. And so for this case, instead of actually having to add people to Google Analytics and teach them how to log in and that sort of thing, which it's really not all that difficult, but a lot of people either don't want to or have trouble doing it, you can just share them a link, and then it'll bring up something like this for them, so they don't actually have to go into Google Analytics to find whatever it is you're trying to share with them. And then another really big benefit for Data Studio, just like with a Tableau or a Domo, is that you can actually bring in additional non-Google Analytics data sources. So Data Studio connects to a whole bunch of other tools, especially Google tools like AdWords, DoubleClick, Google Sheets, BigQuery. We can also upload data via a CSV. And so if you have data coming from like advertising platforms that aren't Google owned, like Bing, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, you can actually put that data into these sheets as well. Or if you want to automate that, you could export it as a CSV on a regular basis, put it into a Google Sheet that constantly updates, and then connect to that Google Sheet, and it'll update in Data Studio for you. So here's the example of the Data Studio report. This is just showing you at a high level on the left side here, top left, we're looking at that main site to mobile website to mobile app comparison. And so this is at a high level just showing the markets and the corporate company, where they are with their different platforms. And so if they're increasing, decreasing over time, that's something that they monitor regularly. And then the bottom right-hand screenshot here, we're looking at the different, the actual top properties for each of those different platforms. So for the main sites, here are the top desktop sites in terms of sessions and page views. Same thing for mobile apps and mobile web. So this is really valuable to understand. Last month it was example 1, example 2, example 3. This month, is it changing at all for the main sites, or is it actually staying the same? And so this is something that they monitor on a regular basis. So that's an example of the Data Studio report. I wanted to also show you an example of this multiple data sources that we use. So on the previous screen here, the top left report and the bottom right report, both of these are coming from 3 different Google Analytics properties. So we have 3 different rollups that were created, 3 different property rollups that were created. We're actually connecting to those 3 different properties within the same dashboard. So here's what this would look like in Data Studio. Not really going to go into how we get to this point. More or less just wanted to show you that it is possible. And so the data sources for this example media dashboard is 3 specific properties in their views. So we have a main site rollup view, a mobile website rollup view, and then a mobile app website rollup, or a mobile app rollup view. And so you can see using reports, the main site 6, 5, and 4. And so this is what it would look like kind of on the back end of how we're connecting to that data. And so the last thing I wanted to cover here was how to get started. And so obviously this probably all sounds well and good, but if you wanted to get started with this tomorrow, there's some things obviously we need to work through first. So one is you need to decide what you need to roll up. And so this really depends on your business model, your company, the industry you work in, but you need to figure out, do I want to roll up different markets, brands, platforms? So that's really the first step, understanding what we need to roll up and what we want to look at. The next would be ensuring that you have all of your Google Analytics 360 properties enabled. So again, this is a 360 only feature, and so to do a roll-up property, you need to have all those properties already on Google Analytics 360. Ensure all your properties are in the same Google Analytics account that you want to create the roll-up. And so, for instance, if I have a corporate account, if I create the roll-up in that account, then you also have to have all the different properties you want to roll up in that same corporate account. Otherwise, it's not possible. And so I did mention it is possible now that you can actually move properties across different accounts. And so if this is an issue for you, you can actually use that feature, which is free for standard and 360 clients, to move your different properties across whatever accounts you need to. And then you need to work with a Google Analytics 360 reseller like InfoTrust to then reach out to Google to create the roll-up property. And so this is, I envision this actually changing in the future. You'll probably be able to manage this yourself. Right now, it's still Google managed. The last step, or one of the last steps here, is then adding those properties to be included in the rollup. So you have to go to the Google Analytics admin section. Under the property settings, there's rollup management, and then you add your property sources for that rollup. And then the last is decide where you're going to be doing your data visualization and analysis. So if you're doing it in GA, you might need to look at the standard reports. If that doesn't show you what you need, then build out some custom reports or dashboards. Or if you're using another data visualization tool like Data Studio or Tableau, you need to push that data into those. And so both Data Studio and Tableau have native integrations with actually both Google Analytics and BigQuery. And so you can use those in native integrations. If you're using something like Domo, I think it has a Google Analytics integration as well, but you need to set that up and then start pulling that data into your tool. And then from there, it's building out the visualization, sharing it with people, getting feedback, and then constantly updating those reports for everybody. So Those are the main steps for getting started. Obviously, kind of kept it high level. Unfortunately, with this specific feature, a lot of the data that we have to share would be from our clients, and because we have NDAs, we're not allowed to share that data with you. And so I took you through kind of a high level with some example reports showing you what that capability looks like. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. My email again is agibson@infotrustllc.com. Be happy to help you through email, or if you want to set up a call to chat, that's fine as well. So I'm going to stay on for a couple minutes here, see if we have any questions. If not, really thanks for joining today. We'll be in touch in the next day or two with a copy of the recording and also a copy of these slides. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So thanks for your time today. I'll stay on a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions, but if not, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.